All right, welcome back. Today we're doing GPCR adenyl cyclase pathway. So two videos ago, I mentioned that we have something called G protein coupled receptors. These are essentially proteins located on the membrane, basically the lipid membrane bilayer, and they're involved for cellular response. So there are three pathways we need to be concerned of. We're only going to go over the first pathway today, and I'll do the rest of the pathways later on in probably the next two videos. So today we're just doing the GS pathway. Usually on a physiology exam, your professor will be asking, please write out this entire GS pathway or write out the entire GI pathway, whatever. That's usually how it is. So this is just a memorization kind of deal. That's all you really need to know about this is memorizing the pathway. So let's start off. What is a GPCR? So GPCR stands for G protein coupled receptor. And the G stands for guanine. You don't need to worry about that. What is a G protein? So G protein is essentially a protein located in the cell and in the membrane. And this usually activates something to get a cellular response. Now, the receptor, why it's called a coupled receptor, is because attached to the G protein is a receptor to actually activate the G protein. It will make much more sense once we go over the pathway, but this is like honestly, I'm just trying to explain, what the meaning behind is. So two videos ago, we went over these three types of receptors in the membrane, proteins. So the first thing is we went over voltage gated. So we went over that when the voltage is basically at a certain voltage, for example, plus 40 millivolts, then we get a cellular response. Usually because ions come in and we get a cellular response. The other way was chemically gated. So for example, we have hormones binding. We have a certain ion binding, and this would cause, basically we would have the ligand, which we said was like a substrate. It could be a hormone, could be an ion, could be whatever, something chemical. It would bind to our little protein, our channel essentially, and you get a cellular response, usually due to ions coming to the cell. Then we had mechanically gated channels or proteins. And this was usually by temperature or pressure. So I think I mentioned in my previous video that if, for example, if you touch a part of your skin, you feel pressure. That pressure activates this protein, opens the channels, and allows ions to flow through. You get a cellular response. And what is that cellular response? Well, eventually you feel that you touched your arm. That's the cellular response that we're feeling. So now we have a new pathway now. This is called the GS pathway. Sometimes in our body, we require things not to be instant. We require some cellular responses to take some time to activate. We don't want to happen all of a sudden. I'll go over the examples later on in another video, because I just want to make this video as basic as possible so you understand and memorize this pathway. But this GS pathway has a lot of uses. Usually, a lot of them have to actually do with the heart and like the sympathetic system and parasympathetic system, which is like your fight or flight response. So let's get started. So the first step is we have a ligand here, right? That's the black thing here. So that's our little ligand we talked about. So a substrate could be a hormone. It could be anything. So it's literally anything that can bind to this receptor. So this orange squiggly thing is called the GPCR. This is the receptor for the G protein. So the ligand binds to the receptor, the GPCR. It binds to it. A signal literally goes down this little snake little looking orange thing. And do you see how it's connected to this red figure of this red thingy? This is the G protein. It's basically a guanine-made protein. And what it does is it activates this G protein. So this ligand, when it binds, it signals to the receptor and signals to the protein, hey, it's time to turn on. We have stuff to do. When this turns on, this activates something called adenyl cyclase. So when G protein is turned on, adenyl cyclase turns on. It basically tells, the G protein tells its neighbor, adenyl cyclase, hey, it's time to turn on, we got stuff to do. What does adenyl cyclase do? This is essentially an ATP factory. Okay, what it does is ATP goes inside this little factory and it spits out as cAMP. It converts the ATP into cAMP. The cAMP turns on something called protein kinase A, or pKa for short. What does this mean? So what a kinase, if you ever see the word kinase, this means phosphorylate something. So phosphorylate basically means, in other words, adds a phosphate group to whatever molecule or protein. Okay? So this is exactly what we're going to be doing, is this protein kinase A is going to go over to a protein and phosphorylate it. It's going to add a phosphate group to it. So essentially, we have our little protein here, and then this little pKa is going to come over, it's going to put a phosphate group on it. That's it. That's what phosphorylation is. And now this protein is basically charged with energy. This phosphate group gives it energy to do stuff. And that energy is what we get for the cell response. Whatever is going to happen in the cell. If you need some kind of task to be done, this protein needs to be phosphorylated. It needs to have a phosphate group on it so it can actually do its task. It has energy to do its task. Pretend you get up in the morning, right? And that's why they say breakfast is the most important meal of the day. It gives you energy to actually do stuff. Pretend your body is a protein. You get out of bed, you don't really have much energy. But once you phosphorylate yourself, you get breakfast in you, you have a meal. That's essentially what's happening. You're able to respond and do stuff. You can go out, you can attend your classes, go work, do whatever. You're basically creating a cell response. You're making things happen essentially. And that is literally it to the GS pathway. So the GS pathway, we also call it basically the cAMP pathway because it involves cAMP. We activate cAMP. A little overview of the other pathways is the GS pathway, which we just went over, increases cAMP levels. The GI pathway, which I'm going to do tomorrow, inhibits cAMP. So think about the I in the GI pathway is inhibit. The GQ pathway increases pKc levels. In other words, what pKc stands for, I'll go over it, in a later video, is phosphokinase C, pKc. And it's another kinase, so you can imagine what we're going to do. We're going to be phosphorylating things with this kinase. So this is the very quick video on the GPCR, or the GS pathway to be more specific, or the cAMP pathway. So for your physiology exam, make sure you remember this pathway. It's better if you can draw it out. It helps you so much better if you can draw this out and understand what it's doing. Hopefully I explained this well, and please like and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow for the GI pathway. All right, see you soon.